Hi everyone, I hope you all are great. Today we will have semicolons, colons, and commas. First, you have to log in using the eplustudent.com. Click on it, move on to language at the grade 7. Chapter is semicolon, colons, and commas. Lesson will be use semicolons and commas to separate clauses. Use semicolons, colons, and commas with list. Okay, so you use a comma to separate two independent clauses that are joined with a coordinating conjunction, such as and or but or so. So we have and, board, or so these are the coordinating conjunctions that we have. However, if the coordinating conjunction joins verb or verb phrases in a compound predicate, a comma should not be used. Okay, so we have Wyatt was reserved around new people, but he was hardly shy. So but is a coordinating conjunction, so we have to use comma, and then Wyatt was reserved around new people but was hardly shy. So this was what the verb phrase, right? Okay. Then also you use commas to separate dependent clauses and an independent clause when the dependent clause comes first. So when you have dependent and independent clause and then the dependent clause come first, you would use what? A comma. These dependent clauses usually start with a subordinating conjunction short as after, although, because, when, all this. Okay. So we have So we have although Wyatt was reserved around new people, he was hardly shy. So although here is what a subordinating conjunction. That means it's starting with a dependent clause, so we have to put a comma in between them. Now use semicolons to connect to closely related independent clauses that are not joined with a coordinating conjunction. So if you have two closely independent clauses that are not joined with coordinating conjunction, then you would use what? Semicolon. While was hardly shy, he was simply reserved around new people. So semicolon. Okay. Also use semicolon to connect two independent clauses that are joined with a conjunctive adverb. Okay. So if it's joined with a conjunctive adverb such as consequently, however, therefore, nevertheless, you have to use semicolon. Just like Wyatt was hardly shy, then we have the semicolon. Nevertheless, he was reserved around new people. So you can see that the semicolon always comes before the conjunctive adverb. Okay. So the dependent clause, unless you want to remain in depth, okay, that's for the example. So we will just move forward and then see the example. Okay. Okay, so add a comma or semicolon if needed. Otherwise, submit the text without any additional punctuation. Right. So unless you want to remain in debt forever, you need to stop succumbing to impulse purchases. The financial advisor told Mr. Whitaker. So we have what? Unless, right? Unless is what? A subordinating conjunction. So we need to put a comma in between the dependent and independent clause. Okay. So let's look over here. Since the Maya of Central America began eating a Western diet high in sugar in the 1950s, their rate of diabetes has surged. So there's a space here. What do we have here? Since is what? A subordinating conjunction. So that means the first part is a dependent clause. So we have to put a comma in between the dependent and independent clause. So we have to add a comma or semicolon if needed. Otherwise, we just submit the answer like that. So we have on the ground. Uh, Groundwater comes from underground reservoirs called aquifers. Then we have a space here, and we rely on these sources to meet half of our water needs in the United States. First to second. So we have and, right? So that's coordinating conjunction. We need to put a comma. Okay. Wild leaks in a whistleblower website where people anonymously report illegal wildlife trade. The site may prove effective if they fight against wildlife crime. However, it requires internet access in order to be useful. So the first to second. Okay, so we have, however, so we have to make sure that we have the semicolon first. Okay. So next up we have Shrek, a New Zealander sheep, went 6 years without being shorn. That so his fleece weighed 60 pounds when it was finally caught. So is it first or second? So we have the second one. We put a comma because we have a coordinating conjunction which is so there. All right, then next up we have airplane food has a reputation for being unappetizing. Dash, but the food itself may not be responsible. Researchers have discovered that high altitude and decreased humidity dull our ability to detect flavors. First, the second. So we have but because we have what coordinating conjunction. Okay. Please just give me a moment. Hi everyone, sorry I'm back. I just had to sort out some technical issues. So sorry for that. Alright, so we have the next. Before Miss Rivera saw the Beechwood National Forest, that she had no idea how stunning the landscape is in Idaho. So is it first or second? Okay, so we have the second one here. Okay, alright. Scientists believe tornadoes form due to high relative humidity and significant wind changes in the lowest region of the atmosphere. Dash furthermore, tornadoes only form if downdrafts are present in just the right part of the storm. Is it the first or the second? So furthermore is a conjunctive adverb, so we have to put a semicolon before furthermore. As Richard chopped the cilantro for the chili, I shredded the cheese for the quesadillas. Is it the first or second? All right, so we have the first one. All right, that's it for this lesson. Move on to the next one. So try to complete it if you haven't done it, okay? So you have to use colon to introduce a list after an independent clause. If a list does not follow an independent clause, do not use punctuation to introduce the list, okay? So we have my parents have visited much of Western Europe. So we have the colon, Austria, Belgium, France, Germany, Greece, Italy, the Netherlands, Portugal, and Spain. Now my parents have visited much of Western Europe, including Austria, Belgium, and the rest of them. So if it does not follow an independent clause, you do not use punctuation to introduce the list, but you have to introduce a list after an independent clause, just like the first part. Okay. So you use comma to separate three or more items in a series. Put a comma after each item in the list except for the last one. So if you have different items in the series, you have to use a comma to separate them except for the last one. Okay. Our speaker will be Kelvin O'Malley, Richard Stein, and Linda Wu. So you can see that we put a comma after the first, the second, the third, the fourth, but for the last one you do not need to add a comma. So you can see that Linda Who doesn't have a comma. You put a comma before the and the coordinating conjunction. Okay. So you have to make sure you use the comma to separate three or more items in a series. Okay. All right, so we use semicolons to separate items in a series when using commas would be unclear, such as when one or more item in the series already has or contains commas. So our speaker will be Kelvin O'Malley, then you put comma, and English professor, you put your semicolon. Rachel Stein, a print journalist, you put your semicolon, and Linda Wu, a blogger. So if you're gonna have different items in the series, and then if you use a comma it will be confusing, then you have to use a semicolon. Okay. All right, so let's look at some examples. Earlier on, when I said there was a technical issue, there wasn't, but the A plus website was updated. So if ever you're logged out, you can just use your ID, your email password that you were given to log in again. It's gonna look a little bit new, but yeah, just log in the same way you always have. Henry saw five highly poisonous snakes at the reptile sanctuary, the boomslang, the Eastern tiger snake, the saw-slade viper, and the banded crate, and the king cobra. So what are we gonna have here? It's a series, so we have to make sure that we put a comma in between all of them except for the last. So let's move to the test. You can share your answers with me. Some of history's most famous spies include Francis Walsingham, who spied for Queen Elizabeth, I. Nathan Hill, who spied during the Revolutionary War, and Bell Boyd, who gathered intelligence during civil the Civil War. So is it gonna be the first or the second? All right, so we have the second. So we have to use semicolon and colons because it is necessary. An unrelenting drought in California has drained lakes, rivers, and snowpacks, so the state now relies on groundwater to meet demand. First to second. So we have the first because we need to have a comma before the coordinating conjunction, okay? And it's a series, by the way. According to the data from 2011 and earlier, some 20 to 32% of wild caught seafood imported into the United States was from unregulated, illegal, and unreported pirate fishing sources. So the first to second. So we have the first. If you would like literature, you would likely enjoy revisiting Shakespeare and Company, a bookstore in Paris, France, at Wilding Pond in Concord, Massachusetts. So is it first or second? Okay, so we have the first one, the second one rather. So inspired by President Franklin D. Roosevelt in 1941 for Freedom State of the Union address, Paint Anoma Rockwell painted for paint is freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom of from want, and freedom from fear. First or second? So we have the second. So the Vision Center offers a large range of optical service and products, including routine eye exam contact lenses, a large selection of fashionable and affordable frames, and industrial safety eyewear. Is it first or second? Alright, second. So that's if we're lesson under the semicolon, colons, and commas. Can you tell me if you have any questions? Alright, since we have no questions, we'll end here. Try to complete this lesson if you haven't done it. See you next time. Bye.